How's it going, guys? It's Richard and welcome to this Evolution of Combat Analysis video. So I know it's been only a couple of days since the last episode where we were talking about weapon damage and the way it's all calculated behind the scenes, but this one does follow on quite nicely from that previous episode, talking about a bit more specific things when it comes to magic weapons. So if you haven't watched that video, then it's definitely worth a watch if you're interested in these sort of mechanical things, and also I might be making references to some points in that video. So a couple of basic things when it comes to that I mentioned in the last video is that dual wielding / two-handed weaponry generally has about 50% more damage output than the one-handed equivalents if they're in the same tier. So when it comes to magical weapons, obviously things work a bit differently. They actually, all the damage is, the core of the damage all comes from the spell. So weaponry doesn't have any effect directly on the magical damage, which is a little bit deceptive at times, and people don't actually realise this, but if you hover over the weapons you'll notice there is absolutely no damage modifier. So we're just going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how that changes the way damage is calculated. So a couple of things. Let's start off with the easiest of them all, and that is the one-handed equivalent. Now if you've ever seen what the damage of a chaotic claw is, which has got the same attack speed as a wand at once every 2.4 seconds or once every 4 game ticks, you'll notice that the damage is 768, which is exactly the same as all the top tier spells because they're all evened out to be the level 80 damage equivalent. So if you look on my damage stats here, you'll see that it's actually, it says 867, that's 867 with my magic level. So if you take off my magic level of 99, you notice that it's back down to 768. So that means it's exactly the same damage and speed as the chaotic claw. So keeping in theme with that nice equal damage output per tier. And you can see reasonably how quickly it attacks when you're just attacking this dummy. So once every 2.4 seconds you can see quite clearly. You also love the air surge animation, massive spell around the area. So now let's go into a little bit more depth and talk about what happens when you do the dual wielding. So as we know, dual wielding should increase the damage output to be about 50% more than before. So if we wield the Grapholic Orb and then we open up the equipment interface, you'll see something slightly different than you might previously have seen. So you might have been expecting to see a damage that is exactly half of that there, but no, it actually works in a very special way. The offhand essentially creates an additional spell, so it attacks at twice the speed. Although the speed here isn't listed to change, the speed actually does change dramatically. So if you want to know exactly how dramatically, then I'll quickly attack this dummy and you can see quite the difference. So really quick, it's happening really often compared to what you got with the wand, so it's going absolutely crazy, and that is once every 2 game ticks, so once every 1.2 seconds, and that is really quick compared to anything you'd see before. Now you might be thinking that if it basically doubles the attack speed, if it goes from once every 1.2 seconds to once every 2.4 seconds, then surely that's 200% damage. Now they actually do something. They basically reduce the damage of the spell down to 75%, so you lose that. So you lose 25% of your damage. But if you then times that 75% damage you get from the spell by 2, which is the attack speed increase, then you get your 1.5 times multiplier, or 150%, as that was the form of decimalization I was working in, or not decimalization, as it seems. So we've looked at the way that wands and offhands work and the way they sort of collaborate together. You might be interested to know what happens when you try and attack something with magic when you're not even wielding a wand, but you are wielding an offhand. So as you see, it actually does entirely remove the spell damage in the first place. So you go back to your melee damage. So your melee damage is always your strength level, by the way, in case you didn't know that, and it's crushing. So a little bit of extra information for you there. So now let's move on to staves, or the staff. I don't know. Some people get annoyed when people say stave, although I believe staves is the correct way of saying it. But if we wield it here, and then we open up the equipment interface, you'll notice that the damage hasn't changed whatsoever, even though the attack speed has changed to average, which is once every 3.6 seconds or once every 6 game ticks. So it looks like on paper the damage output using a staff is actually going to be significantly reduced. Which, yeah, it does actually look like that, but there's even more happening behind the scenes here. So, as the staff is a two-handed weapon, it means that we're going to have to get 150% damage output. Now, what we've got here, we've also got the reduced attack speed. So, a lot of maths goes on behind the scenes here. So, you get 1.5 times damage multiplier for the fact that the attack speed is 1.5 times slower than you would get with the wand. Then on top of that, because it's dual wielded, you get another 1.5 times multiplier, so you get, for the fact that it's two-handed. So what you get with that, you get a 2.25 times multiplier with the damage, and when you put that into a calculator, if you do the 768 times the 2.25, you'll notice that the damage is 1700, which is actually 100 less than what you would get with weapons of the same tier that are two-handed, such as the Chaotic Maul, but that's just the way that magic works, unfortunately. I don't know whether they compensate for this somewhere in the system, but on paper it doesn't appear to do that. So as you can see, if we attack it, you do have that considerably reduced attack speed. But you will notice as well that the hits that I'm doing in general are considerably higher. Your max hit is a lot higher than what you would get with the wand, and also what you would get with the offhand weapon. So that is a huge increase. So basically, if you're intending to do if you're trying to do as much DPS as possible, you always want to go with a two-handed weapon, as you should know from previous parts in the game. Also, it's nice. I know from that angle, it looked like my staff was going through my neck. So yeah, so if you want to get as much DPS as possible, you're always going to want to use two-handed weapons or dual-wielding weapons. Now, on to my next point. So that is all about auto attacks. All that I've stated before is how auto attack damage is calculated. So obviously that sounds great. That sounds, oh yeah, that's obviously the damage we're getting. You've seen the damage I've got there, so I'm just going to quickly go back to the wand, and you can see the general hits that I'm hitting are considerably lower. So that is auto attacks for you. So that is how auto attacks work when you're using magic. Now, when it comes to abilities, as we know, Jagex have got a bit of a reputation for accidentally breaking things when it comes to abilities, and you might be interested to know that magical weapons don't affect the ability damage whatsoever. This is a bit of a joke, considering that they are supposed to, so it means that when you're using a one-handed weapon, your damage output, in theory, is identical to that of using a two-handed weapon, as long as you only use abilities. This is why if you ever look on the forums and people are talking about magical damage output, they are always saying when you can, like if you're using a staff for example, every 2 abilities then let an auto attack go, and then you'll get considerably more DPS, and this is because it's broken. Put simply, it's broken in the same way that dual wielding is broken, in that the ability damage doesn't calculate correctly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to pause the recording of the live recording. I'm going to go into some pre-recorded clips showing the critical hits that I get using the rack ability. Now, if you remember from last week or when I did the previous episode, you'll notice that the critical hit is always 125% of the weapon damage. So if you divide that hit that you hit by 1.25, you'll get your weapon damage. So if we go to a pre-recorded bit where we'll be able to see the actual damage output that we get, you'll be able to see quite how abilities are broken. So up first we have the most basic of the 3, and that is the wand. Now you see in the clip there I was able to hit a critical hit of 960, so if we divide that 960 by the 1.25% that we had there, then you should get yourself a result of 768. Now that sounds like it's working perfectly, but then if you actually do the same test with other weapons, such as the Chaotic Claw, which does have that same attack speed and damage, you notice that the damage is actually far closer to about 1500, which obviously means that invisible 2 times multiplier that you see when what's happening behind the scenes obviously isn't working. So once again, magic falling a little bit behind, which is a little bit unfair, but let's move on next to the orb. So now that we're wielding the orb and the wand at the same time, that means that we should actually see an increase of about 50%, which would mean that we hit probably at about 1400. Unfortunately, as you can see right there, we've once again hit a 960. So sadly, exactly the same calculation as before, 768 damage, using an orb offhand while using abilities then, proven to be completely worthless. And the final test that we've got is the staff. Now this is obviously the most unique of the 3, because although it is still a single weapon, it has a changed attack speed and a changed from being a one-handed to a two-handed weapon. But once again, you'll see that the hit that we hit with the ability was still 960. So very much broken when damage is being calculated with abilities, which is a real shame because Magic looked like it had a lot of potential when it came to the evolution of combat, but unfortunately at the moment, unless you're killing Glaciors, you're much better off to only ever use momentum with Magic or just to negate it entirely. So what we've summarised from this video is that we've figured out exactly how Magic does work, but unfortunately we figured out that it also doesn't work at the moment. However, there are some patches coming in March which should see some vast improvements to the way that a lot of the mechanics work in the evolution of combat, so hopefully we'll see those changes come soon. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video again and that it's been informative for you, and I hope to see you in the next episode.